Guys, what if I told you that Tommy's Matchbook is better than ever before? And no, it's not just the artifact mods that are enhancing Tommy's Matchbook, although yes, that does help here. What's really picked up Tommy's Matchbook is Bungie stealth buffed this auto rifle. Now, I'm not sure when it happened, but let me just say its ignition damage is hitting much higher. For example, in Season 22, we were doing 17,000 ignition damage against Carl. This season, we're doing 42,000 damage. That is a ginormous buff out of literally nowhere. Today, guys, we're going to talk about Tommy's Matchbook, how this 720 auto rifle has made a hell of a comeback with higher ignition damage and the ability to scale that ignition damage. Now, just a little recap. Our exotic perk here is Ignition Trigger. Sustained fire with this weapon overheats it, increasing damage, but burning the user. So similar to like Touch of Malice. Now, in order to reach that damage buff, and of course, start seeing that self damage, you have to fire 20 uninterrupted shots, and you'll see the overheated debuff, which will pop up, and then you'll see your health start to deplete. And the question is this worth the extra damage? Absolutely. It's essentially double damage, and this is against all enemy types. But looking here at Carl, we've got 916 per body, 1,374 per crit, with a base DPS of 16,488, and this is at 720 rounds per minute. But with Ignition Trigger kicking in, those numbers jump up to 1818 per body and 2727 per crit. This actually gives us a DPS value of 29,477. That is, of course, if you land a full magazine of crits. And it's got a hell of a magazine. Look at this, 100 rounds. Now, for those wondering, how does this base DPS compare to other exotic primaries? And again, we're not even incorporating ignitions here. What actually compares against the likes of things like Quicksilver Storm, Outbreak Perfected? I think the main thing that has been the drawback is, of course, that self-damage. Now, this brings us to the second perk, Heat Sink. Overheat damage is reduced while not aiming down sights. You see the fantasy here, guys. Bungie's literally like, hey, roll up in there with that Tommy gun and just start blasting. Now, looking at it side by side, as you can see here, when hip firing versus aiming down sights, you deplete your health about 33% lower. Now, one thing I do want to highlight as an important note for Tommy's Matchbook is that its self-damage only burns away your shields. Once that health depletes to red, that self-damage stops. So no, you won't kill yourself. But yes, it does make you easy cleanup. Now, for those wondering, Cross, who the hell is going to be hip firing an auto rifle at 40 plus meters? You're right, which is why I still aim down sights when I'm at great ranges. And if you got the health regeneration, which we're going to go over the exotics that can do so, then you'll be cooking just fine. Now, the third important perk comes from Tommy's exotic catalyst called Heat of the Moment. While Ignition Trigger is active, your health recovers more quickly and sustained fire scorches your targets. Now, that is what really set Tommy apart from other solo weapons. And we have a few: Polaris Lance, Skyburner's Oath, Prometheus Lens. We have certain weapons that are able to dip and intrinsically apply Scorch, but there's not many of them. And Tommy is one of the few that has that ability. Question is, how often can we reach ignitions? Well, in a single magazine, once you get things fully amped up, Ignition Trigger is procced. At base, even with Ember of Ashes, you can reach 2 ignitions, almost 3 in a single mag. Now, that's 42,000 damage without any buffs being tacked on twice in a single mag. Now, I'm starting to question whether or not this change to ignition damage actually occurred in Season of the Witch. Again, I said Season 22, but the footage that we had back in Season 21 clearly showed 17,000 damage. But Season 22, Bungie made adjustments to the Scorch application from Tommy. Originally, it was 14 plus 7 with Ember of Ashes. Now it's 15 plus 5. The idea of the change here to Scorch was to still give you benefits from Ember of Ashes, but base Scorch would be slightly more. Granted, this is a subtle nerf, but with ignition damage scaling much higher, this is overall a huge net buff. Now, I mentioned you can get 2 ignitions in a single magazine, but this season, you're able to achieve 3 ignitions. You see, there is a mod in our artifact called Flint Striker. Rapid solar precision hits and rapid solar weapon final blows will grant radiance. Now, the reason why this is important is, yes, the 25% buff is very nice on any weapon, but it's when we combine it with the artifact perk Kindling Trigger. Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants. Guys, it is because of that mod that we were able to achieve, for the first time ever, 3 ignitions in a single magazine of Tommy's Matchbook, which is a hell of a lot of extra damage. Now, for those that don't know about Kindling Trigger, it applies Scorch Scorch, but again, it cannot reach ignition on its own. It essentially just moves that starting point, which is perfect here for Tommy's Matchbook considering the first 20 shots don't have ignition trigger propped. Therefore, it's not applying Scorch. But that's the beauty of this synergy. It applies Scorch on the front end, and it allows the weapon to apply Scorch on the back end, therefore giving you those back-to-back ignitions. And again, keep in mind, with Ember of Ashes, Kindling Trigger applies 40 Scorch stacks. And again, after the Scorch changes not that long ago, they don't fall off nearly as quickly, and that's the reason why we're able to get those back-to-back ignitions. Now, there's a ton of benefits to ignitions, right? You've got the AoE damage, the single target damage, but before you ask, does it have the ability to stun multiple champions? Unfortunately, no. At least not if you have anti-overload auto rifle selected. Once you have that selected, it's locked in. Meaning if I go in there and I proc an ignition on an unstoppable champion, but I have overload auto rifle selected, it will not stun that unstoppable champion. Super unfortunate. However, if you proc Radiance and you don't have anti-overload champion mod selected, you can of course counter both barrier champions and unstoppable champions, so it is able to double dip in that way, but so can many other weapons. Just something to keep in mind, guys. If you find yourself in a GM trying to stun a champion, you're like, dude, what the hell is going on? This guy won't stun. But as far as our other artifact mods, Kindling Trigger, Flint Striker, Torch if you have somebody on your team that's applying a stasis debuff or even a strand debuff, Heart of the Flame, Revitalizing Blast, and Rays of Precision. You take advantage of those artifact mods, you're gonna get many, and I mean many kabloomies. It's equivalent to Polaris Lance. But see, this is the thing about Polaris. I love Polaris, but the second room of the Battleground Nightfall on the Moon, you find yourself in a very sticky spot with Polaris. You essentially just brought a scout rifle into a close quarter fight, and it's apparent extremely quickly how overwhelmed you can be. But not with Tommy. Tommy has that ability to handle those short range engagements. As a matter of fact, it's actually better because you can hip fire here. Now, some things to take note of with Tommy is that you can amp up that ignition damage with surges. Not only is it increasing the damage of Tommy itself, but this also bleeds over to our ignition damage, considering that the ignition sourced from Tommy's catalyst are considered weapon damage. Matter of fact, 3 surge mods will increase Tommy's ignition damage to 52,115, as well as increasing the damage for the weapon itself. Overall, guys, you're looking at phenomenal DPS here from a primary weapon, with the ability to do good single target damage and shred high health targets. But let's talk about that big con, the one major drawback for Tommy, and that's the self-damage. That self-damage hurts everywhere, whether you're running Lost Sectors, Grandmasters, even the Coil. Granted, there are other activities that you can get away with that self-damage, but when you get into things like Master or higher, that self-damage pretty much leaves you one shot at all times. However, let's talk about some exotics that can help with this. One of them is an exotic that we've used in the past, and it is a clear favorite for my solo players out there, and that is our Lordly Splendor helmet. I love this exotic when it comes to anything that requires me to stay alive. It comes with the perk Cauterizing Flame. When you're critically wounded with full class ability energy, or when you cast a barricade, you create a sunspot at your location that has improved restoration effects. And again, I think Lordly is still the better play in solo content. There's a reason why so many Titans were using Lordly in the final encounter of Warlord's Ruin. As a solo player, it literally keeps you alive. But that's as a solo player. This season, there's a new exotic on the block, and I would argue and say that it is the better exotic for your entire team as a whole, and that's Precious Scars. Probably the last exotic you thought we would recommend. It comes with the perk Kintsugi. Final blows from weapons with a damage type matching your subclass energy create a burst of healing around you that grants allies restoration. After reviving or being revived, you gain an aura that provides overshields to you and nearby allies. Now this changed right here in Season the Wish, where kills with weapons matching your subclass now apply restoration. This is 3 seconds inside of PvE. However, with Ember of Solace, it's 5 seconds. And this is not just benefiting you, this is benefiting your teammates. You're literally playing as a support role here while also outputting very good damage. And throughout this process, whether you're running Lordly or even Precious Scars, if you're rocking Soul Invictus, you'll be spawning in those sunspots. Again, this one is just defeating scorched targets will create sunspots. It also works on solar ability final blows as well as hammer kills, but just running in there will give you restoration as well as regenerate your abilities faster. But the main benefit here, guys, with Precious Scars is just keeping your team alive. These GM runs right here were in Fire Team Finder, just pulling folks, and I just wanted to put Tommy under stress. I wanted to see how it performs in an LFG environment, and it did great. It gave me the best of both worlds. It gave me ignitions on par with Polaris Lance, but with the ability to shred ads that are closing the gap on me. The fragment combinations that I fell in love with, though, were Ember of Empyrean, where solar weapon or ability final blows extends the duration of restoration and radiant effects applied to you. Just perfect here. I'm also rocking Ember of Eruption, Ember of Ashes to apply more Scorch, with of course Ember of Solace. These were the 4 fragment combinations with Soul Invictus and Roaring Flames that I found a lot of success with. Precious Scars has become such a good support exotic. There were literally times in that second room encounter where I was able to keep my team alive because of Precious Scars. It mitigates that self-damage that Tommy gives you. But I think between Precious Scars handling team environments and Loreley handling you when you're playing solo, you really have the best of both worlds. Guys, that is Tommy's Matchbook in Season of the Wish. The only other downside I know to this auto rifle is that its reload speed could be better. It's really not good. Bungie, please buff it. With extended mag hurting the reload speed, look at that. Have you ever seen a stat that low? So I highly advise putting on some reload mods. I wasn't rocking any, but you may want to rock at least 1, maybe 2. But when you do reload and you do start laying on the trigger with Tommy, the world will burn. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.